Hello and welcome to the wonderful world of moron psychopaths and mental defectives. Welcome to HTML5TX. My name is Estelle Weyl, and what we're going to talk about today is 10 things you might not have known that your browser could do. So it's CSS, HTML5, JavaScript, and browser features. My name is Estelle Weyl. My slides are on GitHub. All of my slide decks are on GitHub, so if you want to do the 8 hours CSS workshop that we did yesterday, it's all there. It's all open source. And it's generally all updated fairly regularly. Some stuff is a legacy at this point, but it's all pretty good. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am a Twitter whore. It's EstelleVW. So first thing is, it was mentioned earlier, just like 15 minutes ago, but if you weren't here, is you can do this, $selector, without jQuery. This has been around. The selectors API has been around since IE8, so it's very well supported and is not oft used. If you are going to be pulling in a JavaScript framework just to say $li first to find your first li, one, I will shoot you, but two, I will teach you so I don't have to shoot you. Also, I'm not from Texas, so I don't have a gun. I'm kidding. So the selectors API. It's very simple. Document, query selector, or query selector all. You can either do it on the document, or you can find a DOM node here. We did var l equals document.querySelectorAll. We put a selector in there. #bar is the ID of the element bar. And then we use that here as element query selector all foo. What's the difference between the two? One, the query selector gets the first one that it finds. Query selector all retrieves all of them. You could also just do this. Children is document query selector all bar foo. See here, this is a complex selector. Any selector that is supported in CSS is supported here if your browser supports it. So the only browser that doesn't support all the selectors, that supports query selector all but doesn't support all of the selectors, is IE8. IE9 supports all of the CSS3 selectors. If you want to know all of the CSS selectors, come to my South by Southwest talk. There's a little plug. It's in my GitHub. It's estelle.github.com/selectors. Oops. If you're following along and you can't get out of a slide to move next, it's because of the next feature that I'll show. So, selectors API. I just wanted to show two more examples. Here, I'm doing document.querySelector, and notice that just like in CSS, I have a bunch of selectors. They're separated by commas. Anything that you would put in front of your braces in CSS, you can put with query selector or query selector all, including, isn't it funny that, just a second, that this was called a complex selector and it's really, really easy, and this is called a simple selector and it seems a little bit more complex. A simple selector is one that does not have a hierarchy, so that's why it's called a simple selector. Any selector you can put in there. There is a slight difference between the above line of jQuery and the lines below that is what I call vanilla JS, or coding without a library. Here, when you do #slides.slide add class current, it will add class current to every single element that it finds. It does native iteration. Well, not native, it's jQuery iteration. Vanilla JS does not have native iteration, so you do have to pull out your slides using the exact same selector, and then you have to iterate through it. Just using a loop, right? Fairly simple. One thing that I guess would be number 11 is class list. A lot of you might not know, but in JavaScript, without jQuery, you can toggle on and off class using the class list object. Every element has a class list. You can do add, the method add. You can do the method remove. And you can do the method toggle and contains. So you can add and remove classes either by toggling or using add and remove, exactly like you would using jQuery, except for you don't need to pull in a library to do it. And for some reason, I could never figure it out, so I think it's only a 99. So proof that this works. Document.querySelectorAll. I have all my divs have the class slide. And then all of my topics, remember there was a 1 with a star. They all are H1s with a class count. So here, I am counting my slides, and there are 41 slides in my deck covering 10 topics. This is the JavaScript that created this. I'm using querySelectorAll, and that's it. Okay. One more thing to note about querySelector and querySelectorAll is that it is a static node list. When you're using jQuery, you have a live node list. When you use a getElementByClassName, which is probably subject number 12, native JavaScript now supports getElementByClassName. jQuery and getElementByClassName, both of those are live node lists, whereas querySelector and querySelectorAll are static node lists. And what that means is, once you've said what are the, you've done your query selector and you've gotten all your, in this case, my slides, it said that I had 40 or 41. That's it. It remembers that I had 41. It's static. It is the node list that it got when I captured it. If you use getElementsByClassName or $.slides, it's a live node list. If I were to add a slide, it would update. So I'm just going to run this, and I'm going to show you again that I have 41 slides. And I'm getting them by class name and by selector all, so 41. What this is doing, it is adding a new slide just to the DOM, and then it is not doing a query selector all or get element by class name. It's just reporting the length. And if I test it, I now have 42 when I do get element by class name, and 41 query selector all. And if I test it again, 43 versus 41, 44 versus 41, and 45 versus 41. So now it's telling me, do you want me to do alerts? And I'm like, this is the worst way to do a demo, but alerts is what works when you have very limited screen. So to iterate again, a static node list is when you get your node list originally, that is the node list that's kept in memory. Well, a pointer to it. When it's live, it updates if you're updating your DOM. So query selector all is static. The next thing I want to cover is the fact that everything is editable, or can be made editable in your browser, including this. And you saw earlier that that was an H1 tag, right? And I just edited it, and you're like, wow, how did I do that? Very simple, the attribute content editable. I put it on, I took it off my body because I didn't want everything to be editable. But here I can just, this is a pre tag here, and it has the attribute content editable. And I can write, Texans are cute. And smart. Now I'm brown-nosing because I've insulted you guys enough. Okay. So to prove that it works? Oh, what I want to say about content editable is, obviously this is not being saved to the server. We all know that you have to do, FTP or actually SSH into it and do it. But what it is it does change the DOM. So here I changed a pre, but you can also change a paragraph, you can change a div, you can basically make any element that you want behave like a text area. And so you can style it any way you want. So if you're going to be creating forms, you can actually, it's not a good idea, but use ARIA. If you're going to be creating form elements using content editable on a paragraph, use ARIA to tell it that it's a text area. But it does get added to the DOM. So if I were to actually test this, all I'm doing is saying that DOM node, inner HTML, put it here. And that works. Because it is updating the DOM. It is not updating the server, but it is updating the DOM. So what are a few things you can do with this? You can even cut and paste. If you are going to cut and paste or allow cutting and pasting, there is an attribute or a CSS feature, which no one ever uses, called user modify, text user modify. It's still prefixed, so it's -webkit-user-modify with text either before or after the user. how do I know the fact that this property exists? Did anyone know about that property? 1, 2, 3 people. How did you guys learn about that? Oh. Okay, so in my session yesterday, how did you learn about it?
I was trying to make a
Right. Okay, so he learned about it by trial and error. How I learned about it was I read when you open up the Chrome inspector, it lists all the properties that impact something, and I'm like, what the heck is this? And I'm like, cool, this will fix all of my problems. Well, actually, maybe a therapist would fix more of them. But it fixes a lot of my problems when it comes to development. So what it does, this property is, when you paste, it doesn't paste any weird characters. So if you're copying and pasting from Word, let's say, you have bold characters. You know, like it's basically putting all of this code in there to say, make this bold, make this italic, make this whatever, and it'll just post it as text. So that's a feature. The reason I mention it is it might help with this, and I'll add that note to this slide later. It updates the DOM, I already said that. It turns anything into a form element if you so choose. And it has been supported since IE5. So this is not like one of those things that's new. This has always been there. And aren't we schmucks for never having used it? Myself included. Okay, another thing your browser can do is store lots of data. We have several new ways of storing data. We have local storage. We have session storage. Both of those, some people say they're like cookies on crack, but I'll explain the differences in a little bit. We have WebSQL. WebSQL is deprecated. It will never be in browsers that it's not currently in. But what it currently is in is all WebKit mobile browsers. So if you're developing for mobile, you might want to use WebKit, even though you never heard me say that. There's IndexedDB, which is going to be the replacement for WebSQL. Unfortunately, that is not supported in any mobile browser. And then slightly different, you can actually store your whole site locally with app cache. The one I'm going to cover is local storage, and I'm going to compare it, or session storage too. I'm going to compare it to cookies. So what's wrong with cookies is that they're limited in size, and that when you write to a cookie, every time you do an HTTP request, including an AJAX request, that cookie gets sent over to the server and back again. When you have limited bandwidth, that can be a problem. When you have sensitive data, that can be a problem. And when the server's not even using that data, remember when we used to do shopping carts or names, logins, and stuff like that? We always use cookies to store way more data than we should. And also it had no API. It was just basically text. Local storage and session storage are actually stored in the browser, and I'll show you where. That's the wrong key here. So if you go to resources, here's local storage, and here's some stuff that I saved. I have notes and stuff like that. Oh, if you're on my deck and you click the number 4, you can actually take notes, go into local storage. And this will be stored on the browser. If I were to open this slide, if this browser lets me, it's not going to let me. Okay. If I were to open a new window or refresh or open this in a completely, like a new tab in a new window, it would still be there. It's still there. Okay. So it stores it locally, so the user can delete it, but it stores it forever if you choose to. And so it doesn't get deleted unless the user deletes it. It's not sent to the server. And there is apparently a API, because I put a typo in. So, very, very simple API. You have window.local storage, or session storage, .set item, .get item, and .clear. There's a few more. But that's basically all you need to know. You've just learned the entire API. Yes?
I've seen the syntax here where it's local storage .p equals value. And I know that works in some browsers. Is that just completely incorrect? I've seen it a couple of places.
I would have to to recheck the updated version of the spec, because I read the spec a long, long time ago and it wasn't there at the time. But it could actually completely be a property of it, and I could actually take a look, but it would take me too long to take a look right now. So I'll take a look. So here what I did, you've actually seen it, but I'm going to show it to you again. Hello there, everyone. So I save it, and it was saved, and I can look at it here in local storage. Hello there, everyone, it's right there, right? And then I can open up a new window, and there it is. And that is, well, I'm going to close it now, because I want to go back to my deck. But that was on the same server. It has to be on the same domain. And then I just use, it's basically set item, get item, and clear, because you sometimes do want to clear it. It's clear item, and then clear. Clear item will clear one item, and you give it the key that you want to clear. So let's just go over it again. When you set item, you give it a key value pair. When you get the item, you just give it the key, and it will return the value. When you delete the item, you pass it the key, and it will delete that key. And I guess when you want to get the value, I can't imagine that, key doesn't seem like it would be necessary, but maybe someone actually created a shorthand for it, because it's easy to code that. And so this, oops. Okay, this right here is if you actually want to take a look. Remember I said that if you click on the number 4, you have notes, and you can take notes for the whole deck. I actually put all the code here. Obviously, all the code is on my GitHub, but the code's actually here. So all it does, the way I set this up is I want to have a different local storage for every single page. So I grab the URL, so it says which slide number it is, and then the slide deck, because all of my stuff's on GitHub, and every single deck I have. So it gives the slide number, the slide name, the slide number, and that is the key, and then whatever I type in is the value. And it's very simple. It's such a simple API. I've used it here. This is not actually in production because I'm still working on it, but this code is also in my GitHub. This is a game I did. And I'm using local storage for 2 reasons. So I'm just going to try to get a match. Okay, blue was here, and blue was there, right? And I paused the game. So I've just deleted I've just cleared out all my nodes. If I go into local storage on this item, which it's a frame or an object, so that might be a little bit of a challenge, but it's going to be there in my local storage. When I hit play, it retrieves it from local storage, and if you were paying attention, these 2 were the ones that I already hit, and that one was brown, and they're still all the same colors. I also use it here. So if I got a high score, which I don't think I'll get a high score because I'm playing really badly right now, because it's really hard to play when you're, oh, there, I got a 6. My score right now is 4 since I did 2. Enter my name. These are the high scores. And if I were to play again, my name right there is set in session storage. So if I actually reloaded the page, my session would be gone, and I would have to enter my name again. But at least I could play 15 times and not do that. So what type of storages do we have? We have local storage, which is supported everywhere since IE 8. So you can use it. Session storage as well. WebSQL, as I said earlier, is deprecated. There is an example in my QBdo in that game of doing the high scores using WebSQL instead. So if you want to find out the code, it's there, and there's also a tutorial in my GitHub on that. And IndexedDB, I do not have a tutorial on it because I still think the spec is going to change, even though it seems to be finalized. I'm hoping it's not, because it's pretty hard to learn. But I will eventually have a tutorial on that. Fourth thing I want to show you is SVG as background images. The latecomers to the game are IE9 and Android 3, so it's supported since Android 3 and since IE9 and everywhere else. But you can put an SVG as a background image. Matters for a few reasons. One, SVG can sometimes be much smaller than other images, and SVG can also be animated. And basically, it's not just SVG as background images, it's SVG can be used any place an image could be. So if you're using border images or background images, or even list item images, which you really shouldn't be using because they don't work very well, you can use SVG. So here is, I'm going to reload this page, a really crappy example from a non-designer of animated backgrounds using SVG. The code was really simple. I created two SVGs, a star, and the text that's animated. And I just used background image, and I did that. But you can also, instead of doing the URL this way, you can use a URI, a data URI, and actually put the SVG, it's kind of like XML, but the SVG code in there. So you can have 3 lines of code instead of pulling an extra HTTP request. Just realize that when you are using SVG on a browser with limited memory, you are adding DOM nodes, and that can be using up memory. Okay, CSS can count. That's number 5. Notice the number 5 there. There's no number 5 in fact, I can't even highlight the number 5. How did I do this? I used CSS counters. So this has been supported since IE8. And the reason that it's been supported since IE8 is because IE8 is when generated content was supported. So you can count using generated content with CSS. So this deck counts up to 10. If an item is display none, it will not be counted. And that's a fairly new issue that I've just hit. So I need to read the spec up on that. But how do you do this? You can actually create a counter on any element, and you just, every time you hit one of those elements that matches it, you increment it. So here, I am resetting on the body, basically, presentation is the div that contains most everything. And I'm calling this slide, the counter 10 features. And I'm resetting it to 0. So I put that on the parent. And then I increment the every time I hit an H1 that's in a slide called count, I increment 10 features. I give it a background of a star. And before the element, using the before pseudo element, so I'm generating content, I add the counter number, which I do through counter, parentheses, and the name of my counter. And then I add a period. And so that is how we end up with the 5 and the period. And just to show you that I'm not lying, here's the 4. And again, I cannot grab the 4. If I try highlighting it, because it's generated content, it is not part of the DOM. What is this useful for other than my slide deck? Let's say you are writing, you're a PhD student or whatever, and you're putting your dissertation online. Well, it has sections. And so we've only been using ordered lists, right? So we're sticking everything in an ordered list. You don't actually have to put it into an ordered list. You can just count all your H1s. You can count all of your H2s and reset every time you hit an H1. So you could put the counter reset of paragraphs in your H1, and it would reset the counter every time it hit an H1. So that's counting with CSS. CSS can also calculate. Still prefixed in Firefox 4+, Safari 6, BlackBerry 10, Chrome 19, and Firefox for Android, but it is now without prefix in some browsers. So, I mean, it is here and we can play with it. It is supported in IE9+ without a prefix. Firefox, it's auto-updating, so we're good with using it. And it's coming out in Chrome in basically, not the next release, but the release after. It's stable, but it's still in Canary. Oh, and we have no love from Opera or Android or Mobile Chromium yet. So what do I mean by calculate? Here are some calculations. One of the hardest things we've had to do in CSS is basically say, I want this to take up half the room, but we have the box model and I want 20 pixels of padding. We have a solution for that, which is box sizing. So if you use box sizing and Moz box sizing for Firefox, with the value of border box, you can basically match the old IE box model. But in this case, you might want to be calculating other things besides the box model. And so here I'm calculating 50% of the width minus 40 pixels, because maybe I want to put, apparently that is not in a good location, and I can't move my arms around. Let's say I want to put an 80 pixel gutter and put a little image in there until exclusions is fully supported. This is one way of doing it. I can say 50 pixels minus 40 pixels, and that way I'll have an 80 pixel gutter between my two divs, if I had two of them. Or I can actually stick it wherever I would want like a number. So in this case, I'm putting it in a linear gradient. So let me show you by example. So in this example, I have all my divs are outlined 5 pixels and dotted. I made those letter A, B, and C. A is just to show you it's 50% of the width, and the outline color is red. That's totally understood to everyone. In the next two, I say WebKit calculate 50% minus 100 pixels. So it ended right there. And so when I floated another element with 100 pixels, it took up the rest of the space. And you see how 50% minus 100 pixels plus 100 pixels equals 50%, because we're all good in math. And that's how come they're lining up. Does that make sense to people? So that's calc. And I prefixed it here, because WebKit requires a prefix. But in 26, I will be able to remove the prefix, Chrome 26. Here's another example, much more complicated. Have you guys ever been on Facebook and they ask you to count how many squares there are in the stupid square game thing, and everyone answers 42 or 16? Most people answer 16. So I replicated the game using gradients, and the cool thing is, when I grow it, it's still proportional. The lines are always 4 pixels wide. Now, if I grew it to 5,000 pixels, if there wasn't a bug in Chrome over 512 pixels is where it breaks in Chrome on height, and 3,278 on width, because I actually spent the time to figure this out. But it does break, but it shouldn't break, so that's a bug that I've submitted. I basically said that I want all of these lines to be 4 pixels wide. And how did I do that? I used a gradient, and I said, at 25% minus 2 pixels, before that make it black, from 25% minus 2 pixels to 25% plus 2 pixels, so exactly 4 pixels worth of width, make it white. And then I've gone on. And because I'm using percentages, I can grow this, and it will continue to grow. I could have also used background size, and it probably would have been much easier if I just did a little thing and grew it. But if I use background size, the lines would grow, and I don't want the lines to grow. So here I'm keeping them at 4 pixels. So that's how we use calc. You just calculate, and here a percent minus a pixel, or a percent minus an m, or m minus a pixel actually works. You'll get the correct value. We have a few more equations that are coming through. We have min, max, and toggle. So here, like, if an m, we find an m, we could toggle, we would first do it normal, then if an m was inside an m, we would do it italic, and then if an m was inside an m, we would do it normal, and so on. That is not yet supported, but it is in the spec, and it's coming. Okay. Browsers can also buy you a house. It bought my house. IE6 bought my house. Because if your clients are dumb enough to ask you to still support IE6, charge them an arm and a leg. So I don't know if you knew browsers could do this, but it bought me a dump that's kind of like IE6, but I'm kind of fixing it up to be like Chrome. Okay. Browsers can also take your picture. But Firefox and Chrome on Opera only right now, with Get User Media. So the first thing that Get User Media does is if you want to allow it to take your picture, if you want to take someone can't just come in with their website and take your picture. You have to give them permission. So the first thing that Get Media does, you always have to ask permission because it won't work otherwise. And here I'm going to say allow. And then I'm going to smile, and I'm going to take my picture, and there it is. And then I can save it. And there it is, download right there. So how did I do that? Get user media. It's navigator get user media. Where's my success function? Oh, there it is. That's the important part. I first test to see, not all browsers support get media. So WebKit does not support get media yet. So this is the function you want to use, which is navigator get user media equals get user media or Moz get user media or WebKit get user media or MS get user media. And how do I turn this thing on? It went off on me. Anyone know? Oh, well. So my success callback, which is what made that function run, was only for WebKit in this case, because I'm showing this in WebKit. But basically, I created an object of a stream, and I played it. And then, to save it, or to take the photo, I took the current stream, and I put it into a canvas. And to save it, I transferred that canvas into a PNG by grabbing the data from that canvas. So it's actually fairly simple. It's not actually fairly simple if you try to grok it, but if you just follow the code, it's fairly simple. Another thing that CSS can do is animate sprites. So we had an example of animating sprites with Canvas, but you can also do it with CSS. So let me just give you a simple animating function. Here we have, I'm writing a W. It's basically a set of keyframes, and I tell it to go from left to right over time, and to go from top to bottom to top to bottom to top again. And that creates a W. Then I have something called an animation timing function. And I can tell it to start slow and go fast. This is actually going fast as it goes across, which is why the first tip of the W was further that way. If I did ease out, it would be the opposite, because it's going faster and then slower. Okay, so that's animation timing function. There's a few more. There's steps. And most people don't know steps, but it makes it jump in steps. And that can be used to animate sprites. So let me just cover all of the other animation timing functions first, and then we'll cover step. There's this great website so all of these right here, other than the steps, are cubic Bezier functions. And there's some that are set for you, such as ease in, out, and linear. But you can create your own. And a good way to understand it is this website right here. And unfortunately, it's because of the resolution, I'm not actually seeing the whole thing. And I can't actually do anything with it. So I'm just going to give up on that slide and move on to the next. But this is what you can do with steps. So what I have is I've psi as a sprite. And all I am doing is changing the background position. I'm changing the background position and telling it to do it with steps. If I had said, I'm hoping this will work, ease. That doesn't look right. That is the timing function that we were using earlier, right? We could actually do this and make them go forward and backwards. I think that will work. Whee! Okay, sorry, I'm having way too much fun over here. So instead of ease, we're going to use steps 22. Okay, I'm just going to reload the page and make it start again, because let's see if we can make them dance backwards. Yeah, he's kind of dancing backwards. You can't really tell because the steps are kind of symmetrical. But that's steps. So what steps does is it basically, in this animation, my animation says background position 0, 0, background position negative 4,950, because it's actually less than 4,950. Because it's step start, this is a confusing part of steps. There's step start and step end. So it's easy, because like, you're basically moving 225 pixels. Should you show the first pixel, like where it's at 0 pixels, or should you show it when it's at 224? I'm saying show it at 0, which means the last set is never going to be seen, the last part of this, right? So you go one bigger than your sprite. A little bit confusing. If you are actually doing sprite animation and you don't get it, let me know. But I am going to write a blog post on it because it's that good. The last thing I want to talk about is Chrome and memory management. So it's in the debugger. And if you don't know how to use the debugger, here are the instructions. But I am going to go over into my other browser because I've had this on. I've had my Facebook on since we started the talk. And I have not done anything on this page. And we've been going, actually I started before the talk. It's been going on for 43 minutes. And without touching it, this is what the memory is being used. Because it's doing AJAX requests, it's eating up memory, and then it's cleaning up the garbage, but it's not emptying out all the garbage. So you'll notice that this point here is higher than this point. So it is increasing memory, increasing memory, increasing memory, then doing garbage collection, but it's not going back to base. I have another browser window open here. Twitter, the same issue. So why am I showing you this particular thing? Because this browser right now is using approximately, it went up to 15.2 megabytes. How much RAM do you have on your cell phone? Not much. This computer has 16 gigs. Facebook somehow manages to crash all the time on this, and I have no clue why. Probably because it's a crappy site. But Chrome can help you manage your memory, not just in this way. But let me explain to you a few things. So what's happening here is it's showing how much memory is using that slide is using right now. So when I'm developing for mobile, what I used to do 3 years ago is use my activity monitor and keep my eye on Google to see if I was spiking. That was a way bad way to do it. Here it's actually tab specific, so this is really awesome. How did I get here? I clicked on timeline, and then I clicked on record. So let me just get out of here. I'm going to open up my new tweets, and I'm going to open it up again. And you have, earlier we showed you resources, and it showed you that there was local storage, and Twitter has tons of local storage. If you're bugged by that little blue dot that says that you have unread direct messages in all of your browsers, I did a little plugin, a browser plugin or extension that just deletes the local storage and changes the class on that, so you can put it on your browsers and you just click on that button and you don't have to. That's also on my GitHub. But anyway, you have lots of local storage in Twitter. But then I go over to timeline. While my browser's crashing because I'm doing a live presentation. So let's just do reload here, get rid of this, go to sources, go back to timeline. And I hit right here at the bottom. This is record. And this is it's a thing on a map that tells you what colors are. I forget what it's called. But the legend, exactly. So blue is loading, yellow is scripting, and the other stuff is overwritten because I shrank the size. But one is rendering. What's interesting to note, if you are doing animation, like if you're doing the, let's go back to Psy, right here. And you do events, I think. You see it's doing a lot of recalculating styles and painting, because that's what I'm doing. I'm recalculating the style, in this case 24 times a second because I'm using step. Or no, I'm doing step, but it's taking a few seconds, and I have 22 frames. So it's approximately 7 times a second, which isn't bad. But generally, your animation will be 60 times a second, and you want it to both reflow if it needs to reflow and repaint if it needs to repaint. Both of those, and all of your JavaScript functions, everything in less than 16 milliseconds. So that is why you should be using this heavily when you're developing, especially if you're developing for mobile, because when you're in memory and you realize that your memory is up to 3.95 megabytes, which isn't bad for my deck. I did a pretty good job. I have another deck called Don't Break the Mobile Web, and it'll break your website because it's that huge. Nothing like irony. So that is a few tips in the debugger. And that is me. So follow me on Twitter, but definitely if you want these slides or if you want any of my other presentations, they're in GitHub. If anyone has any questions, there's no time, but there's 10 minutes between the next session and now. So feel free to ask. Any questions? OK, thank you very much.